Good evening, Antioch family. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you there in person this Thanksgiving service, but wanted to join you the best way that I know how, and that's through this video coming to you almost live from Louisville, Kentucky. When Brother Wayne asked me to share a few words about what we, the Grimes family, are thankful for this year, the first thing that came to mind was our Antioch family. And for the Grimes family, this has been one of our toughest years yet. Nearly 4 months ago now, a little over 4 months ago, I received a phone call from Mama telling me that Dad had passed away. And that's when the world just collapsed around me, it seemed, as if my own heart had stopped beating. And after making the most difficult of phone calls to Janet and the kids, I couldn't think of what else to do. So even from a distance, I fell into the arms of my Antioch family. I dialed the church number, and after sharing the sad news with Cheryl Friend, I asked for Wayne Holt, one of the Antioch elders. I broke the news to him and knew that he was going to handle it from there. It took me several hours just to get my head on straight and get packed, and then the drive itself took about 3 hours. But I was in shock. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion, and making the trip to Nashville meant that I had to face reality. I had to face the fact that Dad really was dead. I remember thinking as I drove down I-65 that, and listening to the radio, that a reporter, a news person would break in and announce to the world that Dad had passed away, and it never happened, of course. But I felt like, didn't the world deserve to know that Dad had passed away? It didn't take long for word to spread, and immediately we were covered in prayer and concern from family in California, Michigan, Janet's family in Florida, Kentucky, our family in Alabama and Ohio. Prayers were literally being lifted up on our behalf from all over the United States. I later learned that Wayne Holt, Stephen Bridges, and Andrew Sowards were at Mom and Dad's house and actually helped bring Dad down from his den, the room he had fallen asleep in the night before. They were there with my family when I could not be, praying over them, hugging them as they grieved. In the hours before I arrived in Antioch, approximately 20 or more people from church had dropped by, and while we were still walking around in a daze, not even aware of what time it was, our Antioch family, just hours after Dad's passing, was bringing food through the door for dinner. One thing we've never felt as we've gone through this journey is alone. Your love and support continued over the next few days through phone calls, a million hugs, food, flowers, gifts, and your friendship. Also comforting were the stories about how Dad had helped you or a family member during some difficult time. The Antioch church overflowed with those who had been loved by my dad. In many ways, it brought a family reunion of sorts for our congregation. It's a reunion he would have been right in the middle of, hugging every person who walked through that door and saying how much he had missed them, and Dad would have been grinning from ear to ear. The night of visitation, at about 10:30 p.m., after we had finally greeted the last guest, we realized how hungry we were. Most of us hadn't eaten all day, and we were invited downstairs to the large fellowship hall where our dear friends, who also were grieving, were helping keep food warm for us, and had done so for several hours. It had been a long day for them as well, caring for our family when we could not. At his funeral, you celebrated his life with us through tears and laughter and some of the best congregational singing I've ever heard. You waited as long as necessary while we consoled each other in the lobby of the church, unable to go outside to get in our cars to follow that hearse. When the time came, you helped us form a funeral procession that was at least a mile long that led to his graveside on a hillside at the Garden of Gethsemane section of the Woodlawn Cemetery. You watched as my brother Jimmy and I, in 90-degree, sweltering heat, dropped the first shovels of dirt into the grave. It was the last thing in the world we wanted to do at that moment, but it was our way of honoring Dad and accepting the torch he had passed on to us. I was asked by one friend, what are we going to do now that Junior's gone? I'm honestly still not sure how to answer that. I guess here at Antioch, we all need to find a way to do some of the same things that Dad did. Find some way to serve. I have to admit that the experience of coming to church seems a bit emptier now, like maybe the heartbeat of our church skipped a few beats as well, just like mine did when I had heard that we'd lost him. Now don't get me wrong, we love being here with our Antioch family, the family he so adored, but it's difficult. We look for him in the lobby, and there are times where we've thought we maybe had spotted him across the room. Everyone knows that this church is built on Christ and the love of God, and not my dad. But if we had a mascot or a cheerleader, I think that would have been my dad. He was not the church, but he sure made the experience of being here so enjoyable. In years past, Mama could get Dad to go out of town to wherever she wanted to go, as long as he was back by Sunday, so he could worship with his Antioch friends and family. It was honestly one of his most favorite places to be. It is ours as well. I believe that God must have needed to get his greeters in place in heaven. I imagine Dad will be there with open arms, a huge smile, and a funny story to tell for each one of us when it's finally time to join him. Until then, we can cry together, laugh together, hold tightly to one another, and worship together. And we can watch those doors for any new faces that enter and welcome them into our family. Dad automatically loved anyone and everyone who walked through those doors, even a first-time visitor. He was a lot like Jesus in that way. He recognized someone who was reaching out for love and acceptance, and he was always ready to provide a generous dose of both. That is how I would describe our Antioch family. And the Grimes are more thankful than ever for you. And finally, thank you. Thank you for loving my dad as much as he loved you, and for ministering to us when we needed it most. Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving.